Let me introduce myself. I'm Brother Warren Longo. I am an Alexian brother. I've been an Alexian brother for 61 years. I entered when I was actually 18 years old. And I think I will tell you this because it really has meant a lot to me. I remember it every single day. You know how people have dreams? You all have dreams. Well, I was 17 and a half. And I was working in a hospital, paying my way through Catholic high school because my parents were poor; they couldn't afford it. So I said, "Well, I'll work." And he said, and someone said there's a opening in the kitchen at St. Mary's Hospital. So I went over there and I got a job. And one evening I had this dream, and I dreamed of Jesus, literally Jesus, hunched like this with a crown of thorns on his head with a white robe and a very heavy cross, and he was walking very slowly, and he looked back at me, and I went, no. And he went like, "Come on, follow me." And so I said, my gosh. Then what happened? What happened was I called the vocation director up in Chicago. I'm from Racine, Wisconsin. And I said that I would like to put my application. He said, fine. He said, the only thing what we need at that time, the only thing that we need is a bill of good health. So go to your family doctor and get get an examination. And so Dr. Buckley was the family doctor for many years. So I went there, and he said, let me see here. He took his stuff. He said, son, he said, do you know you have a very bad heart? I said, what? He said, yes, you have a bad heart. I said, oh my gosh, I didn't know I had a bad heart. And I just felt I said, oh my God. So what I did was I called Brother Allen up next day, and I said, the doctor said I have a bad heart, so I don't think I can enter. He said, I tell you what you do. Get a second opinion. Racine is only an hour and a half from Chicago. So we have an emergency room at the hospital here. You just come and let me know when you're going to come. I said, I'll come tomorrow, and we'll have one of our doctors. So I went to the doctor. I went to the emergency room of Alexian Brothers Hospital in Chicago, and the doctor said, you got a good heart. I said, what? You have a good heart. And that was due, I think, to Mary, because the day that I found out that I had a bad heart, I went to the church across the street from St. Mary's, Holy Name Church, which was the church that I belonged to. And I went to the altar, and frankly, I began crying. I said, I don't understand. Jesus sort of asked me to follow him, and now I've got a bad heart, so how can I do that? And I said, you at the wedding feast of Cana, he said it wasn't his time, but you said, go ahead and do what I say. Get some good wine for the guests here. And that's what you did for me, because after that, they couldn't find anything wrong with my heart. And here I am, 81 years old, and I still have a very good heart. Okay. Let me just tell you this, that the reason why we're having this is because, first of all, it's the 150th anniversary of the Alexian Brothers here in St. Louis. The Alexian Brothers is a very small order, but we originated in Germany, the Rhineland. We are one of the oldest orders in the world. We go back about 800 years. And we always took care of people that nobody else would take care of. And that's what we've done. So Brother Bonaventure Phelan came to Chicago first, and he founded a hospital there, a small little clinic it was, on the corner, if you're familiar with Chicago, on the corner of Dearborn and Schiller Street in Chicago. It was a sort of a small house, and that was like a clinic or a little hospital, you might say. And he found an old man who had fell down in the gutter, and he literally picked him up on his shoulder and brought him into his little house. And that was the beginning of Alexian Brothers in the United States. 3 years later, he always thought of St. Louis because it reminded him so much. The Mississippi reminded him of the Rhine. So he came to St. Louis in 1869, and there was a Simon's Mansion that was there, which is right here on this ground. It was the Simon Mansion. Mr. Simons was a banker, and he also, what he did was he gave a big donation to Brother Bonaventure, saying, I'm glad you bought this house, and you're going to use it for a good purpose. And on April 19th, 1869, I think it was 1870, because he had to get it all organized. His first patient happened to be a priest, so that he took care of that, and then it began to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And also, it's interesting because this is the 70th anniversary of the exorcism. When did it take place? 1949, 2019, 70 years ago, the exorcism took place at our hospital. Not this building, but the old Alexian Brothers Hospital, which is now demolished. And I'll tell you some stories about that, and there's someone here in the audience who's going to tell you the story as well, because of the room in which the exorcism took place in the hospital. Okay, first of all, let me just say this. One of our brothers, Brother John Grider, some of you may know him, he was here in St. Louis, and he got sick. He was the last brother that literally took care of Robbie. We call him Robbie. We promised that we would never give his real name. He was not from St. Louis. He was from Mount Rainier, Maryland. That's where he originally was from. And let me get, but anyway, on his deathbed about 4 or 5 years ago, I promised that we would do a documentary or something on him in which we would emphasize what the brothers did, because the brothers didn't always get the credit. It seemed like the priests always got the credit, but not the brothers. So anyway, I'm going to be talking about all that the brothers did very shortly. I use the name Robbie because that's the name that we use, and then I'm going to tell you another thing that happened to me. This was when Father Bodern asked to have Robbie placed in the hospital. Well, here's the story. Robbie was about 14 years old. His, I think it was his aunt, was very much into the Ouija boards and spiritualism, and then she had died. And anyway, all kinds of things were happening in the house where he was staying, and where the house where his parents were. There was a nice picture of Jesus, knocking on the door, and all of a sudden, sometimes you could see that it was flipping. Then all of a sudden, there seemed to be all kind of cockroaches and crickets all over the place, and hearing him. And they were saying, where is this coming from? This was never here before. Strange sounds. And he began to act pretty strange himself. And by the way, the boy was, the parents were not Catholic, so they knew nothing about, except that there were strange things happening. The mattress sometimes would start levitating. And so what they did, they went to their own minister of their church. And the minister, sort of what he did was he said, let me see him. His mother said, it only happens, it seems like in the evening. During the day, he's not so bad, but in the evening, he gets real strange, goes into these sort of convulsions and all kinds of stuff. And boy, is he a good spitter. He can spit you right in the face. He's a good aimer. Boom. And the boy didn't know any Latin or anything, and he would speak even a few Latin words. So what happened was the minister said, let me just I'll go to your house, and I will stay with him one evening and just observe him. So he was sitting in his chair, the minister was, and all of a sudden, Robbie would start, especially around 10:30 at night, to have these strange events. He would be saying these words, and he would be spitting, and he would be, real mean and cruel, and things would be shifting in the house, and these strange noises. And the minister said, something is not right here. He said something isn't right. He said, you know what? Let me tell you something. This was before the ecumenical movement, way back in 49. He said, those Catholics, they have these ancient prayers of exorcism. They are prayers that are 600 years old. And he said, what I would do is go to the neighborhood Catholic church and see someone over there. Maybe they can work this out. And so they did. And the priest said, well, okay, he did the same thing with the minister. Let me just watch the kid and see how he does, and let me see. And I'll say some prayers or whatever. And the same thing happened. But what happened, too, was the boy somehow got a hold of the spring under the mattress, and he slashed the priest's arm, 22 stitches all around. And he said, that's enough for me. That's enough for me. That's it. Meanwhile, the parents, one day, a few days later, they heard Robbie was in the bathroom. He was looking at himself in the mirror. And all of a sudden, they heard him go, oh, oh! They heard him screaming. And she ran into the bathroom. He had somehow, like someone was scratching in his flesh on his chest. Louis, Louis. St. Louis. And they said, we have relatives in St. Louis. That must be a sign that we should go there. And so they brought him to St. Louis in Belle Noire, which is the northern suburb in St. Louis. And they stayed there for one of the members of the family was a student at St. Louis University. And so what she did was she said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to ask the priest, the pastor there, about this whole situation. His name was Father Boulder. And so they got a picture of, she talked to him, and he said, well, I'll bring him over to the rectory and we'll see what happens. And the same thing began to happen. And then they went back to, he stayed there for some days at the rectory because they had extra rooms there. And then what happened was they went back home to Belle Noire, and then back and forth. And finally, Father Bodorn said, that's it. We have to do something now. We got to give this boy proper care, continuity of care, and he needs to be in a hospital, in a psychiatric ward. I don't know any person who will take him any hospital except the Alexian brothers. I know them. They're not that far away, and they will take him. Sure enough, he called Brother Cornelius, who, by the way, was the administrator of the hospital here. And Brother Cornelius said, absolutely, bring him over. And we will give him 24-hour care. And the brothers did their around the clock. They would do they cleaned up after him. And they saw, by the way, the brothers, every brother will tell you this, they saw strange things every day. The boy would spit in their face. The boy would curse at them. And during the day, he was fine. And he became a real good friend of one of the brothers, Brother Emmett. And Brother Emmett would take him sometimes out of the hospital room into the backyard because we had a lot of flowers and stuff. Even though it was April, there was, the flowers were blooming. And the boy just said, oh, brother, you are so good to me. And the parents were just so happy about this whole thing. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to read you a letter. This is from to Brother Cornelius from one of the priests who was helping with the exorcism. Father Bodor was the chief exorcist, but he also had other priests. And one of them, by the way, was the documentarian. What he did was each day, he would write up the history of what happened that day, every single day. As you can see, they crossed out the name of the boy because we felt very much obligated not to expose his name. That's why we call him Robbie, even though that's not his name whatsoever. But we called him Robbie on this. But let me just this is the letter that we received after the exorcism. The prayers took effect. The enclosed report is a summary of the case which you have known for the past several weeks. The brother's part in this case has been so very important that I thought you should have the case history for your permanent file. One of the finest benefits that has come to me as a result of this case is a high appreciation of the work and religious devotion of the Alexian brothers. The prayerful assistance of your community was certainly a strong factor in winning the battle against Satan. Your own cooperation to the extent of establishing public devotion to Our Lady of Fatima will always be associated with the inspirational aspects of this case. The family has been won over completely by the wholehearted charity of your brothers. There is little doubt that the intention of Mrs., which is the boy's mother, to become Catholic has been deeply influenced by the Christ-like attitude of the brothers who worked with her. And so what happened was, let me just explain a little bit here. Brother Cornelius was the reason why I got a hold of this. Brother Cornelius was the head of the young brothers who were all on different, they were getting their education in different fields of healthcare. And there was 33 of them. And then he had gotten sick. This was in Chicago. And I happened to be there in Chicago as a young brother. And they asked me to take his place. Shortly after he left, he passed away. So one evening, or one day, it took me about a year before because I had his desk, I had all of his, his office and stuff. I opened up the bottom drawer. I said, I need to clean this drawer out. I haven't cleaned it at all. And lo and behold, I felt some paper. It was this. I said, oh my gosh, look at that. So I kept it because I thought someday I might be talking about this. So then here's what happened in terms of Brother Cornelius. During the 1940s, of those of you who are Catholic, you might remember as a little kid, I was 11 years old when the exorcism took place. I was 11 years old in Wisconsin, but I do remember very much the devotion to Our Lady of Fatima. I remember as a little boy singing, Dear Lady of Fatima, each time that you appear, to help your intercession for peace and unity. Anyway, there was great devotion to Our Lady of Fatima. And so what Brother Cornelius did was he bought that statue here in St. Louis. He put it in the lobby of the hospital, and because the brothers prayed the rosary around the clock. They gave him physical care, yes, but they also gave him spiritual care. They prayed the rosary around the clock, and believe me, they saw all kinds of things happening. They could tell you stories. None of them are living anymore, but they could tell you stories of what they saw in terms of bringing in a tray of food. All of a sudden, the plate would go like that and fall on the floor, or that he would take that plate and he'd try to shove it into the brother's face. He would try to escape, and this would happen usually at night. And so they would, try to calm him down, even though he loved the brothers. But at night there seemed to be a change of personality, especially at night when it was dark. And so anyway, finally, so brother bought that statue. Then in April, toward the end of April of 1949, is the Easter season is coming up, and there's what we call the Triduum, or Holy Thursday, Good Friday, Holy Saturday, Easter Sunday. Father Bodern said, and by the way, before I get into that, would you show the St. Michael the Archangel? Okay. That is a statue of St. Michael the Archangel that Brother Cornelius brought to the boy's room on his bedside stand. It was about pretty much a few weeks after he got there. Brother put that in his room because Michael stands for St. Michael, and it's the putting a spear in the devil. And that's what St. Michael is noted for. So he had that. And then during the Holy Week, Brother Cornelius brought that statue from the entrance to the hospital on the first floor to the fifth floor in the corner right next to his room, so that Mary, Our Lady of Fatima, was right near there. And so the brothers again did rosary and did a lot of prayers to Our Lady of Fatima. Then I would like to do is now, because Holy Thursday, nothing happened. Holy Saturday or Good Friday, nothing happened out of the ordinary. By the way, the boy and the mother and father wanted to become Catholic, so they received communion and everything. And then the boy, it was Easter Sunday. That's the day that everybody, Father Bodern said, that's the day, I bet you, that's the day when things are going to change. He'll get out of this. The evil will evict itself from him. Nothing happened. But then comes the Monday after Easter. And let me read to you what happened, because this is scary in a way, because, this is coming out of the boy's mouth. A real deep-throated voice. The following is an accurate quotation. At 10:45 p.m., this is the Easter Monday, the most striking event of the evening occurred. Robbie was in a seizure, but he was calm in a way. In clear, commanding tones and with dignity, a voice broke into the prayers. The following is an accurate quotation because the priest that was there was taking notes, and this is exactly what he wrote. Satan, this is coming out of the boy's mouth. Satan, Satan, I am Saint Michael, and I command you, Satan, and the other evil spirits to leave this body in the name of Dominus. Dominus is Latin for God. Leave now, immediately, now. Then there was the most violent contortions of the entire period of exorcism. That is, since March 16th. Perhaps this was the fight to the finish. Father O'Flaherty and the brothers and Father Baudrin were weary and sore physically from the exertion, but they said, oh my God, he's gone. Immediately, Robbie came back to normal and said, I feel good. He's gone. He doesn't remember a thing. Doesn't remember one thing. All he remembers is that he was feeling so good. And what it's saying is something that, whether you believe in evil spirits or not, that's not the point. The point is that we know that evil exists. And what the brothers did, dedicated entire evenings and days and taking care of this boy and being spit at and all kinds of stuff, that evil was conquered by good. The brothers' goodness to this boy, which the parents couldn't get over how great the brothers were to their boy. And so he left. After that, he left, went back to Mount Rainier, which we believe he married in 1970. Robbie married in 1970, and he doesn't remember anything that happened, but he does remember the brothers were so good to him, and he appreciates that very, very much. Whether he's still living, I'm not sure. Some say that he is still living. He's not in Mount Rainier, but in an area near Mount Rainier in eastern part of Maryland. Okay, what I'm going to do now is just see if you have any questions at all for me. Yes.
I've heard, I don't know if it's true or not, but I've heard that the house in Belnor is haunted. Is that true?
Some say that the house in Belnor is haunted. There are some who do say that. I don't know. I was never there. I never went there. Yes.
I'm actually going to be the listing agent for that house.
Oh. Oh my God.
Talk to me later if you'd like. My name is Cindy Monroe.
Okay. Very good. Yes.
Okay. I was raised Catholic.
Yeah.
I went to St. Vincent's High School.
Oh yeah.
My sister of Notre Dame told us that there was a boy that went to Lutheran grade school on Shenandoah Avenue, and that it was a rainy day, so they had brought their raincoats.
Yeah.
And They went row by row and told the kids to get their raincoats. And now this is the school sister Notre Dame, Sister Mary Matthews, so I'm pretty sure it's her. And she said when it came to his turn, he floated to the ceiling and went back and got it. Now, I want to know if that's part of the story or something that she said. Also, Father Kester, who was the pastor of St. Francis Sales in the 60s, said that there was desecrations done to the statue of Mother Mary inside the sanctuary.
Is that right?
Yeah, so I want to know if any of that was done by this young man.
I don't think it was at all, because he went pretty much immediately back to Mount Rainier. Yeah, so I don't think that has anything to do with this case. Okay, anybody else?
So, the hospital room where the exorcism took place, is it permanently haunted? Or?
Okay, very good question. And I'm going to ask Pat Lampy to come up here. Pat, I want to say to you that what we did, once the boy left, the room was never used for a patient again. It was never used for patients. It was used as a storage room. That's what we used it for. Pat was working here at that time, so let him give you a little from his own experience.
Thank you, Brother Warren. I worked in purchasing part-time in the early 70s while I was putting myself through college. And we used the old psychiatric unit up on the 5th floor as a storage area for our main storeroom. And the room in which the exorcism took place is where we stored our toilet tissue and our paper towels. And this was kind of an abandoned area of the hospital. These rooms were designed for psychiatric use. Each of the rooms were fairly small and had a very thick oak door closing each room. The doors had a small peephole in each door, and there was no hardware on the inside of the door, and the doors were designed to be self-closing. And we always got a lot of questions about whether these rooms were haunted or not. But I've never had anything happen in these rooms. However, one time I did go into this room with the toilet tissue and paper towels. And we always had to be careful to prop the door open since they were self-closing. And once I went in and thought I propped the door open, and moments later the door closed on me. And I was stuck in that room for probably 45 minutes before someone realized I was missing and came to get me. As you know, early in the 90s, we didn't have cell phones, so there was no way for me to contact anyone. But the rooms really were not haunted in any way, as far as I know. But that is a question we get quite frequently.
Thank you very much, Pat. Any other questions that you might have over here? Let's see. Yes.
Two-part question. Is there a musical component to the exorcism prayers? And is there any further public information available on Robbie's aunt's activities in Maryland?
No, there isn't for either. Yeah, not that I'm aware of.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes.
I was wondering, when the old hospital was demolished?
Yeah. When was it? It was demolished in. Brother Tom, why don't you come up here for a minute and tell them about what you saw? Well, I can just go from here.
About 1980.
1980 it was demolished, but Brother Tom went to see, right before the wrecking ball came the evening before, he went to that area, and this is what he found.
I don't have a great recollection on that, but you know, the room was there, and it was kind of a normal room. I didn't see anything really unusual there, but
Didn't you say there was a seance you thought there was a...
yeah, at times there was some unusual things like that, but I don't have a strong recollection on that anymore either.
Well, I have a personal connection, if I could tell. In 1968, a good friend of mine and I were bussing tables down at the Cheriton restaurant.
Oh, yeah.
Right down the street, Joe Tangero, an old wrestler. And he started bending over and apparently was having an appendicitis. So after he couldn't straighten up anymore, Joe let us leave, and I brought him to Alexian Brothers, the old section.
Oh, yeah.
They operated, he was fine. He had to stay in the hospital about a week. And every day I visited him, the nuns kept coming in and telling us, "You haven't gone up to the 5th floor, have you?" And we just looked at each other and went, why does she keep saying that? We were in the seminary at the time, both of us.
Oh, yeah.
St. Louis Prep Seminary,
Yeah.
out in Shrewsbury. And anyway, he was getting released. So the last day I came up and visited him, we went up to the 5th floor. So we're walking down the hall, it was July. It was 95 degrees outside.
Oh, yeah. Oh.
We got up to the landing and started walking down the hall. As we walked down the hall, it got colder, colder,
colder and
colder,
colder, yeah.
and you could see your breath like it was winter.
Uh-huh.
And by the time we got to the middle room, every door was sealed.
Oh.
We just had this feeling of terror, and we just turned and ran. No doubt in
Yeah.
my mind, evil exists.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, those things, those are what others have experienced, a real coldness as they approach the room. Yeah. Yes.
I was just wondering, I've been raised that over at St., and it might be a rumor that over at St. Xavier Church,
Yeah.
that they witnessed Michael beating the devil down around the same time.
Yes, that is correct. That the priests were at some of them were up that evening and that Monday after Easter when all this occurred, and they saw a bright light in the sanctuary of the church of St. Francis Xavier Church, in which they saw something that looked like St. Michael the Archangel. Yeah, and it was real bright. And then they heard this loud bang. Yeah, you're right. That's what, yeah.
I didn't know if it was rumors or
No,
not.
I think that's what they said. That's what they said. Yeah. It's not in the documentary, but that is what I had heard. Yeah. Anybody else?
Excuse me.
Huh?
I just want to share something. I actually did work here, so I wanted to share that.
Okay.
I worked here as a ward clerk, and I worked in medical records here back in the day, and that was in the 1977 through about 81. And it was in the old building, and then I also worked in the new building. And that room was definitely there. It was definitely roped off. And my training as a ward clerk was up in those areas. And you could walk past there, and then obviously they take you back down, but I did get trained up around there. And I think of all the brothers that, all of that was hush-hush, you didn't speak of it, and you just kind of went on your day. So,
Okay, thank you. Yes, well, we'll go right here and then we'll.
How many exorcisms did it take?
Well, it took, it must have been about, I would say 30 to 40 exorcisms, actually praying over the boy almost every night since before he even entered the hospital. Then after he entered the hospital, the same thing. Yeah, almost every day these prayers were said over him. Yeah. Okay, yes.
When all this was going on, did he remember anything during the day of what was going on at night?
No, he didn't remember very much at all during the day. No, he was pretty fine. Just a few maybe minor things, but nothing of significance at all. No, from what we gathered. He didn't remember anything during the day. It was only at night when those things happened. And he did not remember the night. He did not remember that he was even spitting at people or anything like that. He didn't remember that at all.
Was closed after that event, not just that one?
Pat, was the whole floor closed or whoever?
roped off.
It was roped off?
They had those little roped off ones where they're little ropes, and they're like the little metal things that they attach to. That's what they had around that room.
Okay.
But what about the rest of the floor?
For the only area that I seen was
Just
that certain area next to where we got
where
trained,
he was,
but
yeah.
It's been so long.
Is that right, Pat?
When I was up there, it was not really roped off.
Oh,
I think the education department had one wing. I think the education department had one wing, And then when they had opened it up for storage for us, we had access to the rest of it, so the ropes had been removed by then.
By then, okay. Okay, there were some questions over here. Go on this side. Okay.
I'm just wondering if anything has happened at this hospital, the new hospital, since the old one was tore down and this one was reopened. Hear a lot of rumors, so that's not true.
No, it's not true at all. In fact, every single Halloween, someone comes to the front desk and says, "Is this where the exorcism happened?" And I have a friend who, he said to me, he said, "You know, Brother Warren, I lived right near the hospital. And when I was a kid, we all we'd look over and we'd imagine that we saw green slime coming from the fifth floor." There was no green slime coming from the fifth floor.
Will there ever be an opportunity for anybody to read what's on those papers?
Those are, I don't think so. Unless there's a copy machine nearby where you can copy this and that with me. Yeah. Okay, all right. Well, I'll tell you what, we're going to continue now. Yes, one more question and then we'll go on to part 2.
Do any psychological or clinical notes survive for the case?
Actually, I don't know whether there was any, all I know is that the boy was seen in Mount Rainier by a psychologist, and I don't know of any notes that were about that. But she felt that he was, fairly normal, apparently, from what I gathered. Yeah. Okay, Pat Rick is he'll tell you his story, and I'll hand over the mic to him. Well, he's got his own microphone.
Don't mind.
Thank you for coming this evening. I've written a couple of books, and one of those books is about the Alexian Brothers Monastery up in Wisconsin. And when I wrote that particular book, I mentioned the exorcism, and I only dedicated a couple of pages within that book. And I'm really glad that I did, because I've learned so much more since that book, and I'm in the process of writing a book, and the book is entitled A Purloined Diary, an unsettling case study of an exorcism. This is a working title. It might change a little bit, but I'm here this evening to give you a peek into what I've written, what I've discovered, and I suspect I'm going to discover a little bit more. So, from the preface of that book, this is what I've written, and I won't read you the entire preface, but I'm going to give you a peek into what I've been writing. The author William Peter Blatty wrote The Exorcist in 1971. The movie followed in 1973, both on paper and especially the film, directed by William Friedkin, startled, scaring the hell out of millions. I sat in a Dallas theater with shivers going up my spine for different reasons than the other movie patrons. I was privy to the truth and background that gave birth to this fictional story of a young girl demonically possessed. In my book, I'm offering you a different perspective. I shall neither try to dissuade, debunk, recruit, or convince believers or disbelievers, nor will I attempt to tell you an idea about exorcism and the practice of the rite by the Roman Catholic Church. But first, allow me to take you back in time. There were corps meeting them at the train station. There were more than a dozen young men having traveled together from Chicago that July morning, 1966. Their train passed through Milwaukee, skirted Green Bay, and ultimately disembarked at Shawano, Wisconsin. In less than an hour, they would arrive home, their new home, that is, Gresham, Wisconsin, a bucolic little village. Meeting them were three men in black, a Norbertine priest and two Alexian brothers, dressed in clerical business suits and white clerical Roman collars, looking as if made for Hollywood. Their journey delivered them to a monastery and a storybook appearing institution. Beside a waterfall on the edge of a lovely wooded area, their destination was just a healthy walking distance from that nearby village. Breathtaking would not be an exaggerating adjective to describe their arrival. Greeting them were more men in black, wearing monastic garb as if they were also straight out of central casting. Enthusiastic young men more their age poured out of the grand entrance overlooking the water, introducing themselves as brother this and brother that. They brought the new arrivals' luggage in from the caravan of cars. Now, the fresh recruits stood inside what was once a grand mansion given to the Alexian brothers by a lonely, wealthy woman. It was as if a movie crew selected this location to create a film. Authentic costumes, the sterile feeling of a cloistered convent, and the realization they had committed to join the Alexians. The new men would learn the Alexians traced their origins to the early 12th century. So before I go any further, it's only fair I tell you I was among one of those new arrivals in 1966. It was at this place and how I came to learn a closely kept secret. After 6 months, our postulant class had dwindled down to only 8. Over the centuries, the Alexian brothers learned how to weed out individuals not fitting or those wishing to leave on their own volition. Not long after, I became an Alexian novice and given the religious name of Gordon. We were sat down and told the basics of an astonishing story dating back to 1949. Brother Florian Eberlich, our novice master, took it upon himself to divulge a bundle of unbelievable facts. Florian was not just telling us a story handed down to him. He saw, heard, and experienced firsthand an exorcism. When writing an earlier book, The Abbey and Me, only 2 pages did I dedicate. But I'm glad I did. As I said earlier, I'm glad I waited. In this book, A Purloined Diary, you will read the details, recently discovered documents, and recorded interviews with individuals playing integral roles add to this account. This is a true story. It's reared its head demanding attention. The story won't go away after spanning many decades. So sit back, read, or listen to this true account. Further into the book, which is partially written at this point, here's an excerpt from the chapter. Before day's dawn on October 1st, 2018, I drove away from Austin, Texas. My car was loaded with an inventory of my new books, expunged, published earlier this year, or that year rather. I also brought along a supply of my first book, The Abbey and Me, written 7 years earlier. I was on several missions to last weeks, perhaps a month, packing a few changes of clothes. I considered the fall weather could bring cool surprises. So dressing with layers or dressing in layers would have to work for me other than bulky outerwear. I planned a long, aggressive drive to St. Louis from Austin for that day. It was somewhere in East Oklahoma, and fiddling with the GPS, did I remind myself I was only halfway to St. Louis that day. $2.50, and the Will Rogers Turnpike in Oklahoma delivered me to the Missouri state line near Joplin. I felt the need for another power nap. Instead, I pushed on. Ash Grove, Missouri, a gas tank running low, sleeplessness, and I-45 overtook me. It wasn't until 7 p.m. that evening that I pulled into the residence of the Alexian brothers in St. Louis. Nearly 15 hours of drive time that was over. Greeted by 5 Alexians, there was plenty of gray hair to go around, including my own. I was shown to my guest quarters, 3910 Ohio Avenue, at the intersection of Keokuk Street. It is important I more precisely describe the location of this residence. The Alexian brothers are positioned in the extreme northeast or northwest corner of a large city block occupied today by St. Alexius Hospital, Broadway, and bordered to the south by Osage Street. I lay in my bed thinking that when I was only 1 year old, something extraordinary had taken place here in 1949, involving Jesuit priests, Alexian brothers, and a 14-year-old boy. Too tired to sleep, I tinkered with the bedside clock radio until I stumbled on George Noory in his late-night talk show, Coast to Coast AM. I recall being a guest on his show years earlier when my book, The Abbey and Me, was published. So it's the next day. The auxiliary bishop was taken on a brief tour of the newer hospital built in 1970. He acknowledged the statue of the Virgin Mary and the devotion to Our Lady of Fatima. The significance here was the role this 5-foot statue played and represented during the 1949 exorcism that took place in the old hospital. That is, the old hospital built in the 1870s, and once stood in the same location. The entourage of visiting bishop stepped outside of the front door of the hospital only to be confronted by Christ the Healer, this 16-foot tall brass and fiberglass sculpture, was dedicated in 1984, part of the Alexian's 650th anniversary. The Brothers' Kitchen prepared a simple business lunch to chat with Bishop Rivituso. During a lull and bites of sandwich, I leaned over and introduced myself. I explained I was a former Alexian novice, there to learn more about the 1940 exorcism that took place. On this property, he quickly suggested I make an appointment to speak with and visit with the Most Reverend Robert J. Herman, Auxiliary Bishop Emeritus. With the Archdiocese of St. Louis, like a hot potato, had I been handed off to someone who so appropriate, I wondered if that was the right person. Tell him I told you to call, Rivituso said. Perhaps I'd been handed a gift. I considered emeritus. Meant someone had been around for a bit longer than the rest of us, and I knew a few things of historic value. Hopefully, but would it also indicate Herman was among those preferring to keep the rite of exorcism close to his chest and unwilling to discuss 1949? Auxiliary Bishop Robert Herman came from a generation of St. Louis Catholic priests that were tight-lipped, because they had been instructed to be that way. I'd acquired an original signed letter that had been strictly forbidden by then Archbishop of St. Louis, later Cardinal Archbishop Ritter, to diverge any information about the case. That quote came from a letter written May 4th, 1972. William S. Bowden, the Jesuit, point man, and exorcist in 1949. In part, this is why I wish to get to the bottom of this story from the perspective of the Alexian brothers, who assisted the Jesuits in 1949. I did not expect to get full disclosure from everyone, but I was going to give it a try. After 3 St. Louis days and 3 nights in search of facts, half-truths, and secrets hidden away, my bags were packed to drive less than 5 hours to Chicago. I drove past the old brewery, the Gateway Arch, and crossed the Mississippi into the land of Lincoln. My next destination was the home of an old friend, Ray. Ray was not just a friend, he was an acquaintance, having experienced time as an Alexian, and considered him a good resource for this story. Ray was to be one of my hosts while I was in this circular route through the country. I was particularly interested in Ray's his Alexian days. Ray was trained by one of the senior Alexian brothers, known as Brother Jodocus. Jodocus was an interesting character. The 2 Alexian brothers were not fond of each other. Their chemistry clashed. Before he died, an old man, Jodocus appeared on my radar. Rumor had it he knew more than a little something about exorcism in 1949. St. Louis exorcism, that is. So I was off to Wisconsin, following Chicago. I owed my host more insight into the reason for coming back to Wisconsin and its north woods. I knew they knew I hadn't driven 1,400 miles just to sell a few books and visit a destroyed landmark I already knew extremely well. Approaching 15 years in sickness and in health, I had developed a relationship with my host. This husband and wife team, we clicked. They are just that way. Lubricated with a glass of wine, I was at ease describing my latest adventure, and they coaxed me to talk. And who is this person you're going to up north to see? They asked. I began to tell them this new developing story. About 2 years early, I received one of those mysterious emails from a stranger. Occasionally, people will go to the trouble to track you down, find, write, hope they hear back from you. This email was one of those out-of-the-blue occurrences. I couldn't ignore this particular email from the reader. I couldn't ignore it, I meant to say. The Abbey and Me, renegades, rednecks, real estate, and religion. I was intrigued. In his correspondence, Don told me he was trained as a nurse by the Alexian brothers in Chicago and St. Louis. Something told me the stranger might have more interesting things to share. If I were to ever wish to publish another edition under the same title, I wrote back to Don, resulting in a phone conversation later. In that telephone call, the subject matter drifted toward 1949, exorcism, having taken place under the watchful eye of the Alexians in their St. Louis hospital. Don told me it was in the mid-1950s when he came into the picture. Don volunteered to me he had information directly connected with a certain secret saga occurring within view of the Mississippi River. More specifically, it was at 3933 South Broadway in that famous town known as River City. I suspected I knew what he meant. Little did I know, he had much more I suspected. Don was quite frank, confessing he purloined something long sought after by storytellers, filmmakers, authors for years. Almost immediately, he asked me if I wanted to have a copy. Well, shit, yes, I thought. But I hesitated, and not sure why I was reluctant to jump at the opportunity placed in front of me. I didn't want enthusiasm to get ahead of me. We spoke again by phone. Don made the same offer once again. This time I suggested he keep the original, send me a photocopy. Soon I received a package containing a duplicate of the copied diary of the 1949 exorcism, composed and typed by one of the exorcists. The package included supporting documents I had not anticipated. The evening with my inquisitive Wisconsin friends encouraged me to have another glass of wine with them, and I did. My hosts expressed concern when I explained my destination the next morning. I had a rendezvous scheduled with the mysterious Don. I was a little uneasy as well, but determined to meet and interview this puzzling person. So finally I had an opportunity to sit down and talk to this man face to face. With everything in front of me, I began. Why did you take that document on the exorcism from the hospital? I abruptly quizzed Don. I'd already looked into his background and knew he entered the Alexian Brothers School of Nursing in Chicago. Unabashed, and 60 years later, retired nurse Don and I continued our interview. He walked over to his filing cabinet and extracted a large, aged, fragile, legal-size envelope. Its contents were the original 1958 typed copy, not one of the carbon papers of the case study diary. Don said one of his co-conspirators, we flipped a coin to see which would keep the original. Well, Don did. Before I started this road adventure, I told trusted people about my correspondence with Don. His acquisition of the diary is generally viewed as unprofessional behavior for a trusted medical professional. I had to ask myself, what would I do if given the same opportunity? So I came back through Chicago, Milwaukee, and into St. Louis. It was awkward at times because I was chasing dead people in connection with the 1949 exorcism and the deceased involved in the book and film that followed. I felt as if a clock was ticking over the heads of living people possessing credible information. Those people were dwindling. Reliable sources were hard to find or had lost interest. Worse yet, their memory. It was this Alexian backstory I was exploring, not the typical Jesuit exorcist drama that had been beat to death for over 70 years. I stumbled upon the Feasting Fox, originally established by Anheuser-Busch Incorporated in the Dutchtown neighborhood near the hospital. The dining and drinking establishment, built in 1913, was a prohibition, family-friend, Bavarian-style effort, combining a wholesome atmosphere to eat and imbibe. The evening dinner crowd had not arrived yet, so I took a seat at the bar, ordered beer and a German-style pork entree. Since there were only a few customers, the bartender and I had time to visit. She asked me those routine who, what, where, when questions. Eventually we got around to my purpose for visiting the city, the neighborhood exorcism. Eventually we got around to my purpose for visiting the city, like I said, the exorcism. Others seated at the bar joined in with their knowledge of 1949 story. I could only imagine 70 years ago, hushed conversations about the same subject took place at this neighborhood watering hole. Like old people recalling the sinking of the Titanic, or my generation remembering where they were and what they were doing when President Kennedy was assassinated, my evening at the Feasting Fox reinforced the story was still alive but fading. I felt it my duty to breathe fresh air into the St. Louis exorcism for a generation who were young when the World Trade Center towers fell in New York. This visit to St. Louis was approaching an end, but I knew I'd be back. And I'm back. And I'm writing the book. And I hope it to be ready near the end of the year, sometime in the fall. So I don't have a scary story to tell you, but I want to provide you with good, accurate information where there is some data that will give you information about what took place in this very location those many years ago. What kind of questions can I answer for you tonight? Yes, ma'am.
I see one of those appears to be colored red. Is that the room?
Here's a learning experience for me. So I asked, I think Pat Lamping, I think I asked questions. Well, I didn't quite understand. But it seems to me that I am finding out, and correct me if I'm wrong, Pat, I was told that there was an elevator, I believe, over here, yes?
Yes, freight elevator.
And that when you exited that elevator, you would walk to the south.
Yes.
And it was my understanding that there was a door down, and to the left is where the room was. I hear differently from other people, but this is not unusual for us to hear different versions. People not knowing which is east and which is west, or which is north or which is south, because there are some people that are completely unaware that the sun sets in the west. So, Pat, what do you say?
Yes, you're correct. You would find the door to your left as you exited that freight elevator. Okay. About 3 or 4 rooms down.
Just today alone, I've heard different versions. It's clearly to the right. It's clearly to the left. So, I guess for detail, people like that. But an exorcism did take place up there on that floor, somewhere in one of those rooms. Another question?
Has this exorcism ever been acknowledged by the Vatican? I'm under the impression that it hasn't been acknowledged as an actual exorcism by the Vatican. Is that still correct?
Because there are so many Jesuits involved, I don't think that the Vatican sort of, in a sense, I would say, took for granted that this was a real exorcism because of the fact that the Jesuits were involved in this, and a number of Jesuits were involved with it, who did the day-to-day case study, which just proved, because there are some, the fake exorcisms, by the way, there are some. In fact, one of the, someone in the Congo, a cardinal or something, was, the Vatican said, no more, because it was more fake than real. But I think they know that this was the real thing. Yeah.
Because I only ask because I know that their reasoning for not accepting it initially was because he did not show the cardinal knowledge that is required to be identified as like a real possession, because they have to have like certain things that happen to check off the box to be like, well, he has the physical thing, he has the affliction of holy materials, and then they were saying that there was the cardinal knowledge.
Well,
I don't know, like, do you guys have like an example of cardinal knowledge that you did show?
no.
1949 is a hell of a lot different than 2019. The way medicine is practiced today was not the way medicine was practiced. And the church was different back then as it is today. Fundamentally, this is my opinion. Anybody would be a fool to believe that somewhere in a filing cabinet in Rome, this exists. And what the opinions are today might have been very different back when Pope Pius XII was around. Yes?
There was supposedly an exorcism done in Christ Church Cathedral about this time. Was this boy in Christ, and it failed? And that's why they were was turned over to, this Robbie was turned over to the king.
Never heard of such a thing.
Never heard of
No.
Yes.
Hi, thanks for doing this. How did the media treat it? Do you have anything from the media? I'm trying to think. I'm 66. My mother had a lot of scrapbooks. She lived in North City, and I flipped through them to see if I saw any media. And also, why wouldn't people have celebrated this? I mean, exorcism is recognizing evil. So why
We're
not
celebrating
help support?
tonight. We're celebrating tonight.
Right, but I mean, you know, it's a long time coming.
Well, the media is interested, and some of the things that were put up on the board were from the media. I have some samples of it where it was written from a newspaper. I think a lot of it was St. Louis University's newspaper, but there was a media attached in which there was the story of the exorcism and some of the history behind it.
So let me make one suggestion very quickly. Knock on the doors of St. Louis University, because I think they are planning something in the near future. And let them know that you're interested in more information from whomever has this information. But they will I suspect that something is going to be put together pretty soon to review this whole thing about 1949 all over again.
Well, let me get back to that question. This is from the Southside Journal, March the 14th, 1990, and it says, setting the exorcism record straight. SLU, St. Lucifer Jesuits, shed light on the exorcism of 1949. So it has been in the media. This was the Southside Journal. It used to be, we don't have the Southside Journal anymore.
In 2013, they did a fantastic display at the library there, and they probably plan to do that again. There was hands popping up right here. Yes, sir.
About 12, 15 years ago, I read a very substantial coverage of this whole thing in the Post-Dispatch. They did a special, I'm not going to say a special edition, but it was either 2 or 3 parts, and I can't remember if that was all in one paper or if it was a daily, 3 parts in a daily, but they really went into it.
Yes.
Yeah, that's not unusual, yeah, I would say.
It was standing room only at the Pius XII Library in 2013 in the fall, because St. Louis University did quite an expose in front of a crowd. Yes?
So I think, and I don't want to speak for you, but I think the question was more specifically, why wasn't it entertained in the media back then?
We can't answer for them, but I would like to make an offer on that house if you don't mind. Yes, sir.
I remember that building. I'm not quite as old as Brother Warren, but I'm older than dirt. And I've heard it said over the years, and I'm going to embarrass my wife and her friends, but that when the building was destroyed, torn down, the the wrecking ball, when it hit the room where the exorcism took place, it bounced off the building the first time, and they had to hit it again a second time. Have no idea if that's true or not, or people just carried that forward over the years, but I've heard that said, and I've just wondered about it since then.
Another case of a hard-headed possessed person.
And also, I heard the same thing. I heard a similar story about that wrecking ball having that some strange things happened.
There was a report.
The ER was in that building.
Yeah.
There was a report that Monday night after Easter, and some people say they heard a loud explosion or like the report from a gun. And there's other people that said, we didn't hear a thing. So there's different stories, as there are as many different people.
But as I said before, the Jesuit who was part of the exorcism most of the time was in the cathedral, was in the Xavier College Church when he said that there was a bang and that they saw something like a St. Michael up in the ceiling of the St. Louis College Church. Yeah.
When you speak of an ancient Catholic ritual, how far back does exorcism rituals go? I mean, I'm not Catholic, so I know nothing about this except I recognize the statues and so on.
Well, we know that in the Gospels, Jesus did expel demons, whatever it was, from people, and that I believe the apostles did the same. So, but I know that the exorcism prayers are at least 600 years old. So what between that time, I'm not sure what they used, but I'm sure they prayed over people as Jesus did the same thing. Yes.
So in the Christian religion, they talk about the fallen angel who turned into the devil. Do they know that this possession was that specific entity, or fallen angel, or was it just an evil spirit?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know on that. Did you have anything on?
Well, Lucifer was the chief fallen angel, and so, you know, it was believed to be evil. So he's not a theologian. I'm not a theologian. We're just observers. Yes, ma'am.
Is the document that you got, John, the same?
I don't know. I'm not sure because I haven't seen that yet. All I know is this one is the one that Brother Cornelius received from the Father Bishop who was there at the exorcism, and the bishop said to send him a copy of that. Yeah.
Well, let me address that.
Yeah.
Let me say in defense, this man has kept his promise, and his promise, as the other Alexians were, they were not going to disclose the name or even the details of that. The word has gotten out, but he still is keeping his secret and doing what his promise. I am not going to share the boy's name unless the boy shows up tomorrow morning and he says, I'm the boy, I'm now 80 plus years old, and I will sign a piece of paper saying that you can reveal my name. And if that were to happen, I would give that a second thought about disclosing his name. But I am going to keep the promise too, because it's the right thing to do. Who's heard of the HIPAA laws? Well, okay, so for some of the very same reasons. Yes, ma'am.
So I have a two-part question. One, you know, the old hospital is obviously a beautiful building and it sounds like it was still in use. What was the reason that it was demolished? And the second is, it sounds like the, you know, rites of exorcism has been around for hundreds of years. Has there been any kind of like confirmation or judgment made as to what they think makes certain people more susceptible or predisposed to being possessed, or does it seem completely random?
I'm not sure about that, to be honest with you. And in terms of the hospital was needed, you just have to keep up the same way as St. Louis University Hospital now, as you see, if you go down Grand Boulevard, is, that's going to be a new hospital. We just needed a new hospital which would be more efficient, and that's why we tore the old one down and built a new one. And then we built the brothers' residence, because the brothers, by the way, lived in the old hospital, parts of the old hospital. And then after, with Medicare and all the rest of it, we couldn't continue doing that. So then we built ourselves a residence right behind the hospital here at St. Alexius. And the hospital is relatively new compared to, because you just have to keep up with in healthcare.
Yes, sir. I have sort of a two-part question. The first part has to do with the, I don't want to, well, I'll use the phrase, but I don't mean it as negatively as it sounds, sort of conspiracy of silence, if you will. You know, was there anything behind the unwillingness of people to talk about this other than just wanting to avoid the, over glamorization of this and to protect the boy's identity? Was there some other concern that they had?
A promise was made to the family. We will not go out and tell the world what happened to you in your hospital room.
And the second part of the question is, how then did the novel come about that the story was learned and novelized and then made into a movie?
William Peter Blatty was a Jesuit-trained author. And he had heard about this. He had read something in one of the Washington area papers, and he thought, what an interesting story. I think I will fictionalize this and write the book. Then Friedkin comes along, and they collaborate on the movie.
So he had no direct information about it. It was just kind of second, third hand.
No, he didn't. You're right. Yes, sir.
A little takeoff on that. Was it simply a Hollywood exaggeration of the deaths in the movie?
Friedkin admits that.
Yeah.
Very much so.
No one actually died in the rituals?
No, the priest didn't jump out the window. And then the boy didn't have his head twisted around.
Yeah.
That was all Hollywoodized.
Do exorcisms still occur?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yes, they do.
Here and there, very often, or?
Worldwide.
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 Yes, ma'am.
How did the exorcism prayers come about? Where did they begin?
Read the Gospel of Mark.
Read the Gospel of Mark.
That's right. You'll get your prayers from there. You'll get your
Well,
authority
you
from
said they're
God.
600 years old.
1,000.
You said they were 600 years old.
Well, they were more
The
formalized.
first one that
600.
cast out demons. The Jews were casting out demons. The Pharisees and scribes were casting out demons before Jesus came around. But Jesus commanded them with authority. And then he gave that authority to the 12 apostles to pass that down
to the other apostles and disciples.
We have a question over here. You were ahead of him.
I just wanted to ask, that is the original statue of Our Lady of Fatima. Do you still have the statue of St. Michael?
Oh, yes. The statue of St. Michael is in our archives in Chicago. And in fact, so many people began to touch it that they had to take it out of a common room where a lot of the statues and stuff from all our facilities are placed. And because they put it in a more isolated place because people were touching it almost every day. There'd be 4 or 5 people coming in and touching it. And, that's not the same way you don't touch a painting all the time either if it's a beautiful painting. Yeah.
Is it as big as the statue of Mary?
Oh, no.
It's much smaller.
Exactly. About like that.
Yes, sir.
by my colleague, Dr. Adams. I have a two-part question. But one is that was the child baptized?
Yes.
Or afterwards?
Afterwards.
Afterwards, okay. And the other is, it seems that the world is not getting any better. And there seems to be an increase of demonic activity in the United States and the world. Do you see a concomitant increase in manifestations of the power of God, such as exorcism?
Well, I certainly think that there's a tremendous amount of evil in this world, that's for sure. I see it every day. We read in the papers every day about killings and about mass. Look at it. Did you ever think that 50 years ago that you'd be afraid to send your kids to school because of being blown up or guns or whatever it might be? So I think I think there's a lot of evil out there. Whether it's, I just think there's a lot of evil out there, and we have to get into God or higher power. Yes.
Are the archives from this hospital, are they in Chicago now?
From this hospital?
When it was.
Oh yeah. Yes. All there's a lot of stuff.
Archives?
Not that I know of, although I'm bringing what I have, I'm bringing to the archives in Chicago. Yeah. Any information that I have, which we already have in our archives, but it's better to be doubly sure. Yes.
I am just curious, I've done a lot of research on this for this listing that's coming up, and I was just wondering, I've read that it's true that there was a cross carved into the kid's chest. There was something else that was similarly true, like the slashing of the wrists or something. Are there any details like that people know of?
All we know of is, no, I don't think there's anything particular. All we know is for sure that there was this carving on the flesh that said Lewis on it, and that there were some skin kinds of things that were like scratches on his chest. Or there was more than that on his arms or something, I'm not sure.
In the back?
In the back, yeah.
No, not carving in the back. Question in the back.
Did the scratch stay, you know how they said it was Lewis? Did it actually stay on there long, or you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I don't know exactly how long it stayed, but it seemed to fade away later. But it would take a day or two for it. It would fade away. But there was like anything, if you had scratches on, eventually it fades away.
And no scarring?
No.
You know, a lot of these questions that people have comparing what took place in 49 versus, say, psychoanalytical things that have happened today. Who believes that when the boy was admitted, was he taken for an MRI right away, do you think? What about diagnostic ultrasound? Did they do that? Okay. What about some sort of therapy like shock therapy? Maybe. Okay. So have things changed since then?
Evil has.
Yeah, things have changed a great deal, and we have to remember that, yes, we're learning more in psychology. So whether it's a double personality, it could be a personality problem without it being a possession. But either way, what I'm saying is, you can leave here with this tonight, that there are people, which is the Alexian brothers, that cared enough to take care of the boy, whether it was because he was truly possessed, or whether because he looked like he was possessed, or whether because he had a double personality, which we don't know enough about, and we might know more about it in 20 years. But regardless, we took care of him. Nobody else would do so. We took care of witches. Nobody took care of witches in the 16th century. We did. We did so many things that nobody else would do. We took care of they used to call them idiots. They were or madmen. They were people with severe psychiatric conditions. No one would do it. We did it because nobody else would do it. When the pestilence came into Europe in 1347 to 1351, the people were dying. The priests fled. People fled. The government officials fled. The brothers stayed behind and actually cared for them. Some of them died of the bubonic plague, but we stayed behind and we did what we had to do. And we became the official city pallbearers. After that, the pallbearer guilds, the guilds for the dead, because nobody else would do it. I'm proud to be an Alexian brother because of that, and I want to continue that legacy of doing things that nobody else will do. Like, for example, walking down Broadway at 6 o'clock in the morning. With a guy who's got a gun and says, I think I've been drinking too much. And I said to him, you've been drinking too much? Yeah, you look like you've been drinking too much. And he was about 30 years old. And he said, yeah, I said, I've been on drugs too, as you can see, I'm not doing too good. And he said, and of course, I've got a gun here. And I said, oh, you got a gun? So he took out his gun. He said, yeah. He said, I was going to shoot this guy because he said I owed him more money for the drugs. And I said, I don't have any more money. He said, you... And then he said, so what he did was he wrestled the guy down. I won't tell you the words that he was using, but he wrestled him, he kicked him in private parts to a point where the guy said, oh, stop, stop. And so he said, oh, he said, but I didn't shoot him. I said, I put my arm around the guy, and I said, you know what, let me tell you something. God loves you. You could have killed that guy. You had a gun too. You could have killed him. He was maimed. He was hurting in that area. But what you did is you saved his life. And I put my arm around him and he said, boy, oh boy, you are the best dude I've ever met. And he said, I'm going to walk, by the way, he said, you know, I live down there in Osceola, so I'm going to walk down that way. I said, that's fine, you can walk down that way. So anyway, I think any other things, what we're going to close now with is, because I just want to say that what we're celebrating is that even though it's a new hospital, Brother Bonaventure Thalen came here in 1869, and the exorcism took place here, all kinds of other things, mental health, all kinds of things. People couldn't pay for it. We said, come on in anyway. And so this is holy ground. And we're going to listen. Barbara Streisand wanted to come, but her flight was delayed, so she called me just now and said, just go ahead and play it on the recording. And so here's Barbara Streisand on Holy Ground. You said, I'm kidding you. So you may leave at your convenience. That you might have, yeah.
Was the exorcism done here on the 5th floor, or
yes.
was he moved?
No, it was done on the 5th floor. Yeah, it was done right on the 5th floor. In fact, what happened, Brother Cornelius moved that statue, which was in the lobby, up to the 5th floor during Holy Week and put it in the corner, not in his room, but put it in the corner. And the 5th floor, people have stories about that. I wish Pat Lampy was here because Pat could tell you they never used that room. And then again, this is the old hospital. They never used that room for any patient. They only used it as a storage room.
And that was room 527?
You got it.
With orthopedic supplies?
Yes, you got it. That's right. Yeah, Pat Lampy once got stuck in there and it scared him half to death. I can't get out, the door locked or something.
You had asked a question about the 5th floor. And you know, we're not talking about this building. Correct, the old building. Right. And nothing exists any longer of the old building. We're just standing where it used to stand. I'm sort of rushed through this quickly with you, but, and I know you all have places to go and people to take care of. And what you do is appreciated.
And yes.
So I work over at the college.
Uh-huh.
And in our lobby, there's a very large picture. Would that have been the picture of the actual building that sat here?
Where we're at in St. Lucia University?
No, Lutheran.
Huh?
Lutheran School of Nursing.
Oh, Lutheran School of Nursing. I'm not sure. No, I don't know.
I can't imagine it's got to be a Lutheran.
Yeah.
Because we didn't cross the two.
Yeah, I don't think so. So anyway, do you have any questions at all?
I have a comment.
Okay.
When Brother John was here, stationed here, I was in pastoral care.
Right.
And he said he was actually in the room and spent time with him.
Yeah, I'm so glad
But
you brought
nothing happened.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up because here's what Brother John on his deathbed said, I want to have a documentary or something done to show what the brothers did. It wasn't just these priests, these Jesuits that did a lot of stuff. The brothers did 24-hour care. They were spit at, they were urinated on and everything. And all of these different things happen where this tray, would be, and all of a sudden the plate on the tray would just sweep across the room. So the brothers were, and then they were on the floor, and the boy was wrestling with some of them during these seizures and stuff. So the brothers did an awful lot, and Brother John wanted to have the brother, but she was right. The brothers should get some credit for all that they done. So that was his deathbed wish, and I said, I will do so. Thanks for bringing that up. Yeah.
So, may I ask, when these prayers of exorcism seems that were said in Latin, and the brothers were reciting them, who was doing the prayer?
It was the prayers of exorcism. It was the Father Bodern and a few other priests that were around.
So he's a Jesuit?
Yeah.
So they would come and pray these prayers?
That's right.
Every day?
Yeah, right. Every evening. Yeah.
Is there any truth to, before the wing was tore down on the 5th floor, there was a feeling of cold, different ones, that there was like
People have said that there seemed to be, what happened was the room that he stayed in was never again used as a patient room. It was used as a supply room. In fact, Dolores Lampe's son, who was working here, remembers going in there because all kinds of supplies were there. And what happened was he got locked in, and he got a little bit scared because he was locked in that room because no patient was ever in that room. It became a supply room where there was toilet tissue and whatever, all kinds of supplies were put in that room. We never used it for patients after that.
How did Dad get out?
Huh?
How did Dad get out?
He pounded on the door. Finally, someone heard him and got him out. He might be here tonight. If he is, he can explain what happened.